one of the first things that people think is I just need to localize my keywords. And then if I have this beautiful landing page that targets this particular keyword or this blog post that targets this particular keyword, if I just localize the keyword and then do a couple of best practices, that is enough. I think that is the biggest mistake.
Hello and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, translation, and global communication. I'm Caterina from Undertone. I'm excited to have Bea Redondo with us today. Together with Nicola, they will be exploring the world of the multilingual content strategy and international SEO. Bea is a content genius, and I'm sure you will find this interview as delightful as I did. So, without further ado, let's dive in.
Hi, Bea. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Hi, hello, thanks. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Where are you connecting from today?
I'm connecting from sunny Barcelona. It's really nice and warm here. We're getting close to beach weather, so it's really nice.
You're living up to the summer is approaching, right? It's not there yet, but we're almost there.
Not there yet, but it's probably the best time of the year because it's not too hot.
And so thanks again for joining us for the podcast. And today I just wanted to start from, if you could tell us a bit about yourself, your career, and your current role as Cinch.
Yes. I studied journalism like many, I think, content marketers have. Studied journalism, but I come from a kind of interesting background because I started teaching after school lessons and doing stuff like that even before I started university. So I did kind of a combination between teaching and journalism. I studied journalism and media studies, so it was like a dual degree back in the time. And it was always kind of split between, do I want to be a journalist or do I want to be a teacher? So I think that's probably shaped a lot of how I write and who I am. I then did an MA in screenwriting because I fell in love with screenwriting. I thought it was like, amazing. I was sure that I was never going to write a script that would get sold, but I just wanted to really learn storytelling, and it's something that I've been very passionate about. And so I think on the side, when I finished uni, I went over to the UK, lived there for a very long time, did some teaching and did some freelancing on the side. And at some point, I decided to quit teaching because teachers get a bad reputation for having a lot of holiday, but I cannot tell you, they work so much. It is exhausting. And so I decided to make content writing my full-time job. And I did some journalism gigs on the side. I did a couple of jobs, and I started at Mailjet, which was, back in the day, how we were called 7 years ago, I think, a little over 7 years now. And through that all, I started as a content creator, and I was a Spanish and English content creator back at the time, which I thought was really interesting to see. I think as soon as you speak two languages, any other language that's not just English, they throw you that on the side. And so, of course, it was content creation, but it was also all the translations that needed to happen for the website and all of that. Which was a very painful experience because I was not a professional translator.
But I'm sure you learned a lot. You learned a lot in that experience.
I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about all the things that can go wrong when you have a Slack channel in which you ask native speakers to send translations and stuff like that. So we had no consistent. It was really painful. And so eventually, as the company grew, we got acquired by Melgen, then acquired by Cinch. I started building out a content team, and now my current role is as lead of content and localization at Cinch, which involves leading a team of, I think it's 9-10 people now, and mostly content creators and localization specialists. We really like our localization specialists to be very closely tied with content, so they're content and localization specialists. And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is probably justifies why we decided on that. So a lot of growth in kind of interests and learnings along the way.
Yeah, as you mentioned, today the idea is to talk about SEO localization or multilingual SEO. And so the first question I have actually is, what are some common misconceptions about multilingual SEO or SEO localization?
I think the first one is probably a misconception on SEO itself, which is the focus on keywords. And I think when you add localization to that, one of the first things that people think is I just need to localize my keywords. If I have this beautiful landing page that targets this particular keyword or this blog post that targets this particular keyword, if I just localize the keyword and then do a couple of best practices, include the keyword and headings, ensure there's enough keyword density, stuff like that, that is enough. I think that is the biggest mistake. I think nowadays SEO is moving very much so towards search intent, and search intent varies significantly by region. I think the first thing that people need to do when they analyze and they determine the keywords that are important for them in a particular market is understand what the best piece of content is to get to that keyword. In some cases, it will be the same piece of content as in English. In some other cases, it might be a completely different piece of content. It might be that in a region, a landing page works to rank for a particular keyword, whereas in another language or in another market, what you have to position is an educational blog post. And so just localizing what you have in English is never going to be enough, even if you kind of apply all your SEO best practice. So I think you need to start by understanding what the pain points are for customers, and that is tied to, search intent. What is that people want to learn when they type for that?
Yeah, and actually connected to this, I wanted to ask you, if let's imagine you are the content manager for a startup that is starting to enter different markets, they want to translate and adapt their content, you have to put together like a strategy or a course of action. From what would you start? I know it's a long process, but from what would you start?
It's something that we've done and we've had to kind of think about this. Well, I think what I would do is I would start beyond content. I'm very passionate about content and the impact content can make, but I think certain things need to be discussed at a wider and kind of larger marketing strategy. And it's understanding and identifying those keywords that are going to be important for us in that particular region and how to best adapt them. And so you need to partner with someone that can do very, very, very strong keyword localization in that sense, which is telling you it can be an SEO expert in the region. It can be a local SEO agency. It can be a localization agency that specializes in SEO, but they need to be able to tell you this is not called this way in this language. So for example, if we look, what we do in our case is email marketing at Melvin and Mailjet. It's part of what we do. It's interesting. So for email marketing, for example, email marketing is a term that is very much used in many other languages. However, that is not the primary term that is used to search for an email marketing solution in Spanish, for example. We would, back in the day, nowadays this is changing, but back in the day, it was something that was even probably grammatically incorrect, mailing masivo. And you would be tempted probably, not to go for it because mailing masivo is more like a literal translation of bulk marketing, and you want to educate people on why bulk marketing is not what you should do and so on. But you need to understand that that is what people are looking for. So I think the first thing that you need to do is really identify the keywords that are going to put you in front of the right people in that market. Then we talked about identifying how to best approach them. So in some of those areas, you might have to produce certain landing pages to sell your product. That is fine. But content is a really valuable tool when it comes to developing kind of that SEO strategy, because it supports kind of building topical authority in the regions. I think the next step that you need to do is when you analyze those keywords, you need to go out and look at what competitors are doing. I think it's super important to look at competitors in the different regions and understand what they're talking about, because they've probably done a lot of the work that you're looking to do. So what they're talking about, what the keyword gaps are between what they're talking about and what you are. And with all of that, start putting together a cluster strategy. So content clusters are groups of keywords that are all around one particular topic. They're not necessarily groups of keywords, they're groups of content, but because we're talking SEO, we will think about content that is more inclined to that part. And so you want to build those out and determine what are my core topics that I want to talk about, and how are all the different ways I need to be talking about this. So if you're doing, I don't know, to keep it cliche, a post about a cluster about Spanish omelets, it might be that you do like a master guide on how to cook a Spanish omelet. And then you go into what are a ranking of the best Spanish omelets in Barcelona. And then you go and do a top tips to get the Spanish omelette to some point. And you have a variety of those depending on the different long tail keywords that you identify and build those key clusters. I think you need to organize stuff in clusters because it's how you bring order to your strategy. Because if not, you're just going to go around like a headless chicken trying to do all the different, posts that your competitors have and you don't. You're going to be like, oh, this competitor is writing about this. We will write too. So it's more about understanding the overall picture, because that overall picture is what's going to contribute to building the topical authority, because you're going to be proven to Google that you're an expert in that field because you've covered everything that there is to cover about that. So I think that's really important. I think there's also another important part that I will mention, and it's you need to get local content creators or local partners, because I think just by writing something in English and getting it out there, you're not going to cut it. And so I think you need to start your strategy by finding who is going to be your partner, who's going to own that, and who's going to be able to do that research for you if you don't speak the language. So yeah, I think those would be my starting points, kind of understanding the topics that I want to talk about by doing a thorough keyword research from an SEO perspective, obviously, and kind of cluster strategy and analyzing competitors, and then get myself, some great professionals that can understand the market better than I do and kind of build a strategy out of that.
Can you trace a connection between your brand and the product that you sell and the clusters that you're putting together? Like, is there a connection or a way that you go decide what topics you will talk about and let's say how you will frame them or any of this kind of strategy around this?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Obviously, at Melgan, Cinch Email, we talk about email stuff. So we would never write about Spanish omelets, unfortunately. I have a lot to share about that. So yeah. But I do think it is a very good point, because sometimes when you partner with SEO agencies, and this has happened to me, that don't know a lot about your brand and don't know enough about product, or are just interested in you, growing as much as you can and getting as much organic traffic, you end up going after keywords and clusters that are not necessarily connected to your audience's pain points and needs and interests. And so for us, something I think a very clear example on our side is we do, a lot about email marketing. So email marketing is about brands sending emails to their prospects and their customers. And when you write about email topics, a lot of email topics that come up online are end user kind of topics. How do you open a Gmail account? How do you send a GIF with Outlook? We had SEO agencies that recommended creating a lot of content around this, but this isn't connected to our audience. Our audience is professional senders, and the only reason why we would probably want to talk about that is if there was a connection between how do you send mass emails from Gmail, and you want to educate them that you shouldn't be using Gmail to send mass emails. So I think the first question you need to ask yourself is this connected to my audience's pain points, needs, and interests? And then when defining those clusters, there are like very clear things that are tied to your product and tied to what you want to sell. And then there are others that are a little bit more kind of detached from it, but can also serve a brand awareness purpose, which is like, in our case, we're doing email marketing. So we cover certain digital marketing topics that are not necessarily, around email marketing per se, but we know that a lot of our audience is simultaneously sending newsletters and also managing social media. So if we write about social media, we might get our content in front of people that will potentially become users. I think that comes down to understanding your funnel really well, understanding, what is top of funnel. So where do I want to just create awareness with anyone that could potentially become a customer? And where do I want to start nurturing people down that funnel? And we talk a lot about product-led content strategies and trying to find opportunities to bring your product into what you write about. So especially there are some cases at that very, very top of the funnel where it isn't as easy. So you might have to force a connection a little bit more in there. So if you're talking about social media, you might want to include a section about how you can connect social media and email, stuff like that. But especially when you were bringing it further down the funnel and you have those topics that are more closely connected to your product or your brand, that's when you have to start doing some education on what you offer. What is your competitive advantage? So yes, sometimes with SEO, you go very crazy trying to go after a lot of keywords that might not necessarily have that brand connection. I would take it back to the funnel. Is this a piece of content that my potential customer is ever going to be interested in? Yes or no? If the answer is no, it has nothing to do completely different target, then even if your SEO agency recommends, just ignore it.
Yeah, because another thing that I noticed sometimes, especially when you go in markets that are not English market for some products, you might get very low volumes for certain topics. So that maybe can give way to the temptation to go for, let's say, wider range of topics that might be, let's say, a little bit off-brand or more difficult, as you said, to connect with the products you're actually offering.
That's a really, really good comment because we face that quite a bit. So I think there's an educational layer to that. When you go into certain markets, there's less of an education around the need for your product. And so in our case, for example, we've noticed that in English, if we generate content about digital marketing, because the market in English is so competitive and there are so many great thought leaders writing about that, we find it harder to rank for those topics. But that is okay because there's a very strong search volume for email related stuff. So we have, we can get to people already. There's a big market maturity. There are a lot of competitors. There's big understanding on some of those certain concepts. Whereas on some of the other markets like Spanish, French, or German that we work with, the search volume around email concepts is really low, but it is easier to penetrate something like digital marketing. So we write about digital marketing and we rank, and it is easier for us to build some topical authority around that. So in that sense, what we need to consider is, okay, this market doesn't really know that they have this need. They don't really know that this is a thing that they could be doing better. So how can we hook them from the top with topics that are much more general, like, for example, a marketing calendar? We can produce a marketing calendar and then throughout that blog post, introduce the importance of doing email campaigns around key dates in your marketing calendar, and start to connect that very well with the more educational pieces of content in which we take them to become more of an expert in email marketing. So in that sense, I think, especially in B2B, I think there's a lot of trying to understand if there isn't an awareness for your product and an awareness of the kind of pain point, how can we educate people on what their issues are before they kind of even know that they have this issue? Which is really interesting because once the market develops, and it will, because, there's with global, so we start acquiring some of that, you will own a lot of the conversation in that market. You will be a topical authority once search volume starts going up. The other thing that I think is probably interesting and worth mentioning here is that in many of these markets, the keyword that is used at first is an English keyword. And so I think, for example, German is a very good example because German uses a lot of English words. So sometimes we need to consider, do I need to localize this keyword? And then you obviously don't want to have, good quality local content that is half English, half target language. But it's like, what strategies can I use to penetrate? Like, for example, a glossary. A glossary is a very good example, a strategy to target English keywords in your market, because there's a lot of questions around what is digital marketing? What is ROI? What is email marketing? And so if you build that glossary with the keyword in English, you can start connecting that keyword in English to the keyword in your target language. But yeah, you're going to have to write content where you use some words in English, even though those of us that love languages and love, treating them well, suffer a lot through that.
Well, I know what you mean. Like in Italian, especially from where I'm from in Milan, we use quite a lot of English words in Italian as well, even though sometimes we do have the equivalent. It's just you get used to it. And especially when it comes to business, it's quite common. Yeah, business and technology. Yeah.
I think in our case, because we do a lot of marketing related stuff, I think it happens a lot. But I think it happens a lot in B2B in general, especially in more technical subjects where knowledge and education is developed in English first. We end up acquiring that word. And it's like, especially if you're like a native speaker of the other language, you're a very strong kind of linguist, you're divided between, should I push my language forward and maintain education in my language? And am I kind of an advocate for my language, or do I go after the keyword? So yeah, it's a struggle.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. And I have actually a question about what you mentioned, that the market, in different markets might be at different, let's say, maturity level. So you might need some content that maybe, let's say, you don't really need in English to write about, let's say, what's digital marketing, or maybe you need to write that in Spanish or in French for some reason. So how do you tackle that? Like, do you create the content anyway in English and then translate it, or you create it straight into Spanish, especially if you realize you need it in more than one market? So that is not English. Yeah.
That is a really good question. So I mentioned at the beginning that I've always been very keen on having our localization experts be content experts. I would be more inclined to externalize localization as a whole than to externalize content, local content. As in, if I had to choose between my team of localization and content specialists becoming one or the other, it is more important to have those content specialists that work in the target language in-house, because it's very hard to get that understanding and that reactivity when they're detached from the brand. So we've tackled this in multiple ways in the past. So our Mailjet, our initial brand that I came through, was primarily French. So a lot of content was created in French. I think in those cases, you need to find a core second language that you can translate from. And in that case, maybe I would probably, I don't know, write the article in French and translate from that. I think the other thing is, because you want to have internally those local content specialists, a lot of what we do is they are linguists, they are specialists in speaking languages. Even if they don't master another language other than English on their own, they do speak some other language. So in our case, Spanish is a language that, all of them can read in a way. And then we use stuff like DeepL, or even Google Translate is a killer, but something like DeepL to just do a very, very, very quick translation of this is the content that is there. And then our local specialists take it and adapt it to the regions, because you still want them to adapt it, because even if you need that, what is digital marketing, and that, in the 3 different languages that are not English, you're going to need them in a little bit of a different way. So, search intent is going to be a little bit different across those different regions. So it might be that in Spanish, you want, you do your competitive research and you see that everything that is ranking on page 1 offers a short definition, and then it offers at least 10 examples of digital marketing campaigns. Whereas, for example, in France, you have a complete guide on how to do digital marketing. And so that already changes the type of content. So the way I would probably approach it is, identify someone in the team to write this. Hopefully the person that, if there's someone that writes in a language that is shared among others, and use tools, machine learning tools that, machine translation tools that can do a very, very quick and dirty job to just give a rough idea to our local content specialists on what it is that the person originally wrote, and then just get them to adapt. Something that we've done sometimes is the person that writes the post because I don't want the German writer, for example, doing a job of actually translating this to English, because it's a waste of time. But what we've done in the past is, if the person does a DeepL translation, for example, if the post is written in German originally, the German writer does a DeepL translation, goes through the English to make sure that everything is clear, that there's nothing that is factually wrong or completely mistranslated to the point where it can cause confusion, and then send it out to our French or Spanish experts and be available to answer questions in their adaptation.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation, I think. Especially then it depends also on how many languages then you have to, let's say, adapt that content into. If it's like 20, I think it gets tougher maybe to get 20 people that know, let's say, French or German in this case. It's easier. It's usually easier with English, obviously.
In that case, you might want to have them. That is something that some of our writers also do. You might want to have them write the post in English, even if it isn't perfect, and then get it translated, just because it will save work, it will save time. So I think it's about, kind of analyzing what is going to take you less time, less resources, and produce the best quality work in that case. The other thing that I would say is probably, I'm always very keen on having local teams of content specialists because I'm very keen on building a sense of team and community between them. So I always ask them to work very closely together. If they identify something when they're handling a localization project or when they're handling a content project that they think might be useful to someone else, to flag it, to share best practices, share thoughts, because you can, even if they're completely different languages, and even if you do 20 languages, you're going to find similarities across groups of languages. So Latin languages are always going to share certain similarities where, you know, someone translates into one is going to have a suggestion for someone else. And so I think that kind of sense of, you know, we're working together towards this. And if I make mine better, it's also going to make yours better, is the kind of environment that I always like to kind of foster.
Yeah, especially for creative projects, it's useful. We do that as well. Like you have maybe different languages and, you know, you can maybe read another language, even sometimes even if it's completely different, but you can read it. It can give you some ideas on how to turn a concept around or how to get maybe a different approach to something that you were stuck. Yeah, that really helps. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree. And when I started, we didn't have a content specialist. What we had was marketing. I was the only person doing content. And then the people doing content in Germany and France were marketing managers. But we did a lot of the creative stuff together and it was fun. We did it as a team. And so we could see each other working on the Google Doc. So you would come in and you would see what they'd done. And you're like, actually, you know, I like theirs better. And they give you an idea. So I think especially in those very creative projects, when you want to create slogans or taglines or stuff like that, it's really nice. I think that kind of, you can clearly tell when they have been working separately and individually and when they've been working together. And it also helps you build out your brand identity further because you want a brand that is consistent across languages. You want a brand that even if it's adapted to suit that market, it has a sense of belonging to your overall brand. So that collaboration, I think, between everyone that contributes content is essential.
Yeah, it's like a interlingual brainstorming.
Definitely.
And every language is a different way of seeing the world as well. So you might get a fresh perspective. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks again. So we're going to have a second part where we're going to start talking a bit about like how to balance the fact that you have different strategies for different markets and everybody has to make sure that you don't get an overblown budget and you have a limited capacity. So we'll discuss that in the second part. But thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you. It was great. It was great talking to you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help companies translate their content into results. Get in touch if you want to know more. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. See you next time.